Could this be the end of the never-ceasing conflict between Israel and Palestine? Could this all actually come to an end? For real this time? Not some ceasefire that Hamas or whoever takes over Palestine next breaks, leading to yet another war down the road, but perhaps a lasting peace in the Middle East, or at least for the time being. President Donald Trump is floating the idea of transferring most, if not all, of the remaining Palestinians in Gaza to places like Egypt, to other neighboring Islamic or Arab nations for either the short term or the long term, so that they can finally live in peace. This is an article posted by The Guardian this morning. It's titled, "Trump Suggests Palestinians Leave Gaza and We Just Clean Out Territory." Donald Trump has suggested large numbers of Palestinians should leave Gaza to, quote, just clean out, end quote, the whole strip, after ordering the U.S. military to restart shipments of 2,000-pound bombs to Israel. The U.S. president said he wanted Gaza residents to move to neighboring nations and that they could be displaced temporarily or could be long-term, after a phone call with Jordan's King Abdullah on Saturday. Trump said, "I'd rather get involved with some of the Arab nations and build housing at a different location where they can maybe live in peace for a change. You're talking about probably 1.5 million people, and we just clean out the whole thing. Gaza, you see," writes The Guardian, "has 2.3 million residents. Trump said he asked King Abdullah if the country would take in more Palestinians. Jordan is already home to 2.4 million Palestinian refugees from families expelled back in 1948 after the creation of Israel. Trump said, "I said to him, I'd love you to take on more because I'm looking at the whole Gaza Strip right now and it's a mess. It's a real mess. I'd like him to take people." He also suggested Egypt as a destination for Gaza residents and said he would raise the issue with their president. Since the start of the war in 2023, Egypt has warned repeatedly against forced displacement of Palestinians from Gaza and reinforced its border, which I believe the only reason for that was to keep them from fleeing the conflict, hoping for more casualties, but that's just the cynic in me. What do I really know? Anyway, the president of Egypt, Sisi, said that any move to push people into Sinai would jeopardize relations with Israel, including the 1979 peace treaty between the two countries. A senior Palestinian politician, though, said he completely rejected Trump's comments. The Palestinian news agency reported that this senior politician warned against attempts at, quote, ethnic cleansing in Gaza, saying the Palestinian people are committed to remaining in their homeland. Inside Israel, there have also been calls since the start of the war for the permanent and forcible transfer of its residents. Trump's comments were welcomed by the far-right politicians who back Jewish settlements in Gaza. Now, to be honest here, I am surprised that this hasn't happened already. Israel has been under constant, perpetual attacks for decades, and Israel always seemed to just respond to these assaults on their ability to breathe and live with limited scope responses. But as the years have gone on, the radicals within the Palestinian state, funded and fueled by other nations like Iran, as a proxy to attack Israel, only escalated their attacks. To give better context to the situation, let's take a step back in time and look at what Israel has endured in just the past 35 years alone. See, Palestinian suicide attacks began against Israel in late 1989, or we could argue it really began in full in the 1990s. And it continued into the 2000s, with many thousands of innocent Israelis being caught up in this conflict, many dead, many injured, and it led to widespread fear among Israeli civilians. These attacks were primarily carried out by militant groups such as Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or PIG. Now, the first major Palestinian suicide attack in the 90s began in 1994, April 6th. Hamas conducted a suicide bombing on a bus in Afula, killing 8 and injuring 402 people. April 13th, 1994, another Hamas attack at the Hadera bus station killed 5 and wounded 302. October 19th, a Hamas suicide bomber killed 22 people and injured 50 on a bus in Tel Aviv. And then the attacks intensified in 1995. January 22nd, a massacre was carried out by the PIG, and it involved 2 suicide bombers who killed 21 people and injured 692. Then there was July 24th, same year. A Hamas bombing killed 6 and injured 302. And throughout the late 1990s, attacks continued sporadically, with Hamas and the PIG being the primary perpetrators of these attacks. And in the early 2000s, things got worse. There was a dramatic increase in suicide bombings. From September 2000 to August 2005, there were 151 Palestinian suicide bombing attacks against Israeli targets. These attacks killed over 500 people and injured over 3,400. Some of the more notable incidences here of terrorism was June 1st, 2001. Hamas bomber at a Tel Aviv disco killed 21 and wounded 1,200. March 27th, the Passover massacre killed 30 and injured 1,400. June 5th, 2002, Islamic Jihad car bombed near a bus stop killed 17 and injured 382. Now, after 2005, things changed. While sporadic incidences still occurred, the focus became more on rocket attacks and mortar fire against Israel. From 2001 to 2014, over 15,000 rockets and mortars were fired at Israel from Gaza. By 2014, the total number of rockets and mortars launched had increased to nearly 20,000. And in all this time, my friends, Israel has shown incredible restraint against their neighbor. You see, if this was the US and we had a neighbor that kept trying to kill us, firing rockets at us, doing suicide bombers, let's say in Mexico, there would be no more Mexico anymore. We would have obliterated them. But not Israel. Israel instead tried to do limited response. Have parity, which is stupid and retarded, but that's what happened. So they finally adapted, and then you got the Iron Dome in Israel. The system is pretty good now. It intercepts roughly about 90% of all incoming rockets, which is probably what led to the Hamas planning the more direct, brutal campaign, which they inevitably carried out on October 7th of 2023, where they slaughtered over 1,200 innocent civilians and kidnapped another 240. This, though, seemed to be the final straw for Israel. And for once in my lifetime, they entered Gaza with the intention to wage real war against a militant group that would just not let them live in peace. And so here we are. Gaza is now decimated. But there's no real solution yet to this endless cycle of violence. The problem with the ceasefire is that Hamas hasn't yet unconditionally surrendered, which means that if they are allowed to go back to normal, some point down the road, Hamas will try again. Which brings us back to President Donald Trump and his floating of a plan to end the suffering of the Palestinian people by moving them to a safer location, one where they can no longer be used as tools by their proxy masters, like Iran and their so-called axis of resistance or axis of evil. You see, my friends, the cowards of Iran, knowing that they were unable to directly take on Israel, they used the poor bastards of Palestine as their weapon of war. They used the Palestinian groups as proxies so that they could implement their now long-standing strategy to confront Israel indirectly. Now, while this approach has allowed these monsters of Iran to maintain pressure on Israel without risking direct war, it also contributed to the ongoing suffering of Palestinian civilians and kept the region permanently unstable. But you know, one of the bigger tragedies of all of this is the Palestinians themselves. They are perhaps the biggest loser in this conflict. Generations of children have had their futures stripped away, indoctrinated and raised to hate their neighbors, the Israelites, simply for breathing, simply for existing. They've been indoctrinated to be the next generation of suicide bombers and militants. And so the endless cycle of violence doesn't end, and it doesn't help them. There's no future in this. It is an incredibly sad tragedy that's been going on here for decades. The Palestinians are being used as useful idiots, all to fuel the hatred and rage of the feckless nation of Iran and the other Arabian nations around them that are too cowardly to resist open war against their hated cousin, the Jews. Which then takes us back to the Guardian article. The Israeli finance minister described the relocation of Palestinians as a, quote, great idea, and said he would work with the prime minister and cabinet to create an operational plan for implementation as soon as possible. Before Trump took office, an official from his transition team said the administration was discussing relocating 2 million Palestinians during reconstruction if a current tentative ceasefire held, with Indonesia one possible destination. Jakarta, though, said it was not aware of any such plan. Now, The Guardian writes that Trump has not laid out any vision for his post-war governance in Gaza. While signing executive orders after his inauguration, he discussed the territory as a real estate prospect, praising its seaside location and weather, and said, "I looked at a picture of Gaza. It's like a massive demolition site. It's got to be rebuilt in a different way." Qatari officials who mediated the pause in fighting in Gaza described, quote, any plan that would end with relocation or reoccupation, end quote, as a red line. But Trump doesn't seem to care. The new administration has promised unwavering support for Israel, which is key here, and key positions have been taken by hardline supporters of its expansion. Trump's ambassador to the UN said in confirmation hearings that she considered Israel had a biblical right to the West Bank, which Israel occupied in 1967, but most of the world recognizes as the heart of a future Palestinian state. Good thing the rest of the world has no say in the matter, though. Now, on Saturday, Trump said he had ordered the resumption of shipments of some of the largest bombs to Israel, a widely expected move. Biden had paused the delivery of the 2,000-pound bombs owing to concerns about civilian casualties in Gaza caused by the powerful weapons, which can rip through thick concrete and metal over large areas. When asked why he released the powerful bombs, Trump responded with, "Because they bought them." So what happens now? Will this cycle of violence continue, or will Trump somehow find a way to bring peace to the region? Only time will tell.